The world around us is populated by all manners of people, and not all of these people are human. We are in constant community with a vibrant, magical, and animate world. The term for the worldview that the world around us is inspirited and alive is animism. An animist understands and acknowledges every single day that they are in community not just with their human neighbours, but their non-human neighbours as well. Acknowledging the personhood of not just Gladys across the road, but also the animals, insects, trees, plants, stones, waters, and landscapes we interact with daily. This notion that humans are not the only beings with a soul, a spirit, or a personhood is hinted at in Welsh mythology. Magic, for instance, is often expressed within two primary ways. There is the magic of rhith, which concerns itself with something's outward expression. A magician might change something's rhith in order to make it appear different in some way. But that magic is nothing but illusion, a glamour. Scratch the surface and the truth underneath can be revealed. And then there is the magic of Anyan, and this magic touches on the deeper, intrinsic elements of something. To change someone's Anyan is to change someone not only on a physical or illusory level, but at a soul level. Anyan is not something which is limited to human people alone. Tales from the Mabinogi clearly show us that animals, plants, trees all have an Anyan, an innate and intrinsic sense of being. Skilled magicians, such as Math Fab Mathonwy from the fourth branch of the Mabinogi, can take the Anyan of human people and transform them into the Anyan of an animal, as he does with Gwydion and Gilfaethwy. Or perhaps they can take the Anyan of plants and flowers and transform them into the Anyan of a human, as is the case in the story of Blodeuwedd, a woman who is, at her very soul, formed from the flowers of the forest. These stories hint at evocative, animistic, magical beliefs concerning the world around us, and also at transformative, connective, and alchemical forms of magical practices. Croeso, welcome to the Welsh Witch Podcast. I'm your host, Mhara Starling, and here on this podcast we explore the spirits, lore, and magic of Wales. Now, today I'm joined by the wonderful and the fabulous Sian Sibley. Shan and I have been friends now for a few years, and I just cannot wait for you to sit back and enjoy this really intriguing conversation that I have with Shan. A conversation which meanders and pivots into all sorts of different places. But I do want to add a disclaimer at the beginning that we recorded this episode quite a while back. It's been a long time. As I mentioned in my previous episode, I took a little hiatus, and as such, I have a few episodes that are already recorded but that have not been released. As such, please keep in mind that some of the information we relay concerning Shan, her books, her role as a facilitator of conferences and such, some of that information might have changed by now, due to, things changing as they do. But most of them are pretty much the same. The one big thing that we have to mention is that Shan has since released a second book. So we do discuss her first book a lot during this episode, but she does actually have a second book out now as well, and we'll talk about that one in a moment. But other than that, there's nothing really I need to add a disclaimer for, just that keep in mind this episode was recorded quite a while back. But after this episode, all podcast episodes moving forward have been freshly recorded. Ooh, I can't wait for you to hear next month's. But let's focus on this one, Mhara. So who is Sian Sibley? Well, Shan is a traditional witch, an animist, and a lover of the green world. Shan has been the leader of the DragonOak Coven in South Wales for nearly 30 years. She also organises occult conferences in Wales, which is where and how we met. Shan holds a master's degree in applied biology, specialising in medical genetics, and she also holds a master's degree in ecology and spirituality. On top of all that, she's also an author of 2 books. Her debut book, of course, was Unveiling the Green, which we talk about a little bit during this podcast episode. And her most recent book is called Black Paths and Green Cathedrals. Both of these books are from Black Lodge Publishing, and you can find details of the books down in the description below of this podcast, or you can look up Sian Sibley online and they should pop up. Now, during this episode, we discuss Shan's life and practices, specifically focusing on how she weaves her animistic approach to life, her ecological views, and her occult interests into a fulfilling practice that is rooted to the land, sea, and sky. Oh, during this journey, we go on little tangents about animism, alchemy, astrology, and so much more. We also discuss a very interesting astrologer from Wales who inspired much of Shan's practice. So grab a panad, a nice beverage, sit back, and let's unveil the green with Sian Sibley here on the Welsh Witch Podcast. Today I've got the amazing Shan Sibley here with me on the Welsh Witch Podcast. Hello, Shan. How are you?
Hi, Mhara. I'm doing really well.
Oh, brilliant. I'm really glad that you agreed to come on because I have been looking up to you now for a few years. Now, to give those of you listening a little insight into who Shan is 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 it High Priestess? Is that the title you go by?
No, I'm just the leader.
Just leader.
Yeah.
The leader of the DragonOak Coven. And she also runs the Welsh Occult Conference. And now there's 2. There used to be the one in Welshpool, but now we have one in Welshpool and in Cardiff. And it's growing and growing. And the Welsh Occult Conference is always such a brilliant event. I've been wanting to go for years, but for some reason I never managed to make it because I don't drive and I could never find anyone to give me a lift. And Christopher was being a rascal and not telling me when it was on. So it was always really difficult, but I did get invited to come speak. So I did end up coming this year for the first time and it was glorious. Welshpool is such a lovely town. But anyway, more on that later. To begin with, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your magical life. Who are you? Introduce yourself to us.
Right. I started, I'll be honest with you, my first magical experience was, and I've said this before, I was about 11, and I come from a Good Valley's Pentecostal background, okay, with a very, very fire and brimstone grandfather. And I regularly went to chapel up until I was about 11, and I absolutely hated every minute of it. And then one day, I've always been very naturally minded, and I rode horses, and I used to talk to the trees and riding horses when I was little. And I went into our local library, which at that point in Tonoreville, as you can imagine, lower part of the Rhondda, was a prefabricated building, a little one of those little tiny things. And in there, while I was looking at the books, I found a book called What Witches Do. Okay. And because I was the granddaughter of the local Pentecostal preacher, I stole it because I didn't feel I could book it out without somebody telling him. So I put it in my coat and I ran out with it, and I've still got it today. And apart from all the nakedy goodness, it was the stuff that I was reading was stuff that really spoke to my heart about the nature being sacred, and the way that they were talking about God being in things, not above things, really, really appealed to me. So it started there. And then when I just toddled along on my own, and I went to a camp when I was about 21 in a place called Esgare Mill with a guy called Graham and Margaret Matthews, and they were the Pagan Federation coordinators at the time. And you could tell of what I was feeling because I went there thinking, ooh, this is going to be really tricky because I've never been to anything like this before, and I was really nervous. And I was supposed to go down for the weekend, but I only went for the day because I didn't know whether I should stay over or not. And they did a John Barleycorn ritual, and it was a proper John Barleycorn ritual with the scythe taking off the head of and I just sat there and sobbed, because it just spoke to me so much, and I will always be thankful to Graham and Margaret for doing that for me. And then weirdly enough, when I was about 24, 25, I started talking to a lady on something called AOL Chat, which is back in it was the TikTok of the day, right? And she and her, we got on really, really well. And she was in a group called Alchemist, and they were related to a group called the New England Traditional Covens of Witches. And I initiated with her about a year or two later. And after that, I formed DragonOak. So I formed DragonOak in about 1991. And we've been going strong since then. So it literally was one thing fell into place after another. And I did the thing that I always tell people that you never do, right? And when I look at it now, I think to myself, I got on a plane when my daughter was 6 months old, left my daughter with my husband, and went all the way to Oregon to initiate with somebody that I'd spoken to every day for 2 years, but had never met.
Oh
all
my
right.
gosh.
And yeah, the perfect love, perfect trust thing. Yeah, it really, and it was really funny because I was really scared going over on the plane, thinking they could be Satanists and I could be going somewhere else, you know. And as I got off the plane in Oregon, there was this woman standing in the airport going, so I thought, yeah, I'm going to be okay. And that was wonderful. That was an absolutely wonderful experience. But running the Coven has been, well, it's amazing. It's, as you know, because you're in a Coven, it has its ups and downs. You have your personality clashes and your differences in opinion, but they are my crazy family, and I would not be without them ever. They're wonderful.
Brilliant. Yes, covens can be messy but worth it, I've found, if you're willing to stick it out and look for the good ones.
Yeah.
But just like me, you are a Welsh witch. You are from Wales. You're a bit further down south than me, aren't you? Quite a
Yes.
bit, quite a bit. I don't know why I said a bit. So could you tell us a little bit about whether or not Wales has influenced your practice at all, and the fact that you grew up Welsh as well?
Yeah, the difficult thing for me is at the time I started practicing, there was no non-Alexandrian and non-Gardnerian covens, and I'm not a Gardnerian, I'm a traditionalist, and because of that, I sort of investigated my own way of doing things, and what I found was that I could find, like in the Mabinogion, I looked at the Mabinogion to see if I could figure out how to construct seasonal ritual and how to get, and I just couldn't do it. It just wasn't in me to do it properly. So what I did was we used a general full moon ritual and a general dark moon ritual, and then I discovered the Greek magical papyri, and that's where I found my hook and my magical interest peaked, and that was about 15 years ago now. So I work extensively with the spirits of the land in Wales, but I work with Hecate and Hermes via the deity pathway. But even there, I see Hecate as being in the wood at the back, because she is, people, I think, mistake her for a goddess of magic and the in-between, the psychopompus for between death and life. But she's a goddess of the land. She's the goddess of the threshing floor, which is, I think, is a fantastic way of thinking about it. And don't get me started on the crone business, oh dear God, no.
Yeah, Hecate is one that's always kind of been ever present in my life as well, even though I don't talk about it much. My partner is a huge devotee of Hecate, and I'm just looking around my room, and I have big, huge portraits of Hecate on the wall and a statue behind me. She has so many epithets, and she's so interesting and almost in it, like she can't be separated from witchcraft, I've found.
Yeah, no.
And it's hard to be a witch and not have some kind of interest, even if it's just a minor one, in Hecate. And she's here as well, definitely. Oh,
You were really, really interesting in the Welsh Occult Conference when you were talking about Ceridwen, and there are similar misconceptions around Ceridwen being an older person, and I do wonder, because at some point there must be some sort of group mind going on, because Taliesin has so many Hermetic qualities and she has so many Hecatean qualities, I do wonder, I wouldn't transpose the two because I think that would be rude, but it's amazing the similarities that they have.
Yeah, definitely. And it's worth looking into for anyone, really, especially those of us who are interested in the witchcraft undercurrents in this lovely country. But you also, so one of the things that I really want to talk about tonight is your book, because I was very fortunate to have been sent a signed copy by you of your wonderful book, Unveiling the Green. And it's a brilliant book. It's absolutely fantastic. And it was very strange. It was very good timing when it was sent over my way because I have always been interested in plants and nature in general. Obviously, growing up in a very rural part of North Wales, you can't really not have some kind of interest in the world that was around us. I grew up with, I just recently took my friends back to the village I grew up in, Aberfraw, and showed them my childhood home. And I was showing them how, from my back garden, from the bedroom window that I used to live in when I was growing up, all you can see is views of fields upon fields and trees and hills. And when I tell people that, they always like think I'm kind of lying a little bit, like, you know, trying to romanticize my life. But like even I, walking back into my childhood bedroom the other day and looking out that window and seeing the view of Anglesey, the beautiful scenic Anglesey that is just before my childhood home, even I had my breath taken away for a second and went, oh my gosh, I want to move back. And you know, that was my life growing up, was going out into the fields. I didn't have very many friends, so I always say the friends I had were the stones and the cliffs and the trees and the plants that were growing around me. But since I moved to the border, I moved just to the border a few years ago, and I live now in essentially a big town, a very big town, and it's rather a bit busier than the village I
Yeah,
grew up in and doesn't have as much green spaces as I'd like it to have. And so for years now, I've been struggling with connecting to the natural world and to plants. And I've been trying to figure out how to incorporate that more into my life. And then your book landed on my doorstep just as I was questioning all this and thinking, how can I bring more of nature into my life now that I'm not living immersed in it constantly? And I think you triggered something in me because I'm looking around my flat right now and I've got pots and pots of all sorts of plants and trees and house
yeah.
plants just dotted around this room at the minute. Even behind me, there's one growing up on this shelf that's gone huge over the last few weeks. And, you know, your book being there while I was going through this, while I was thinking to myself, well, if I can't have a garden, I'll have an indoor garden, and trying to connect to the spirits of the herbs that I'm growing and such. Your book really helped with that. So I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write the book and how it came to be?
Well, it's a bit of a weird story, actually. We originally, because we're a traditionalist coven, we were originally, I would say, we leant more towards the Hermetic side of things. So we were very much Kabbalists, and we were very much dealing with things like the tree of life and planetary rituals and all that sort of stuff. And I suddenly realised that we were looking up externally rather than looking at the world, okay? And I've always loved the world ever since I've been a little girl. I spent my childhood riding horses, so I've always been out in the world. And so I decided that we would start to investigate how to work with the spirits of the land. And one of the first spirits that I ever came in contact with in this way was mugwort, okay? And mugwort is the reason that the book is called Unveiling the Green. Because what you'll notice is if you start working with a particular plant, or if a plant decides to start working with you, because that's normally how it goes, you will, having not seen them anywhere, you'll see them everywhere. And they sort of stand there and, yeah, I am here, you know, and they give you these signals that they want to work with you. And I wrote in the book about my husband, who is probably one of the least crafty people you will ever meet, okay? He's just not into it at all. He's a good, solid Welshman, you know. And he has something called Barrett's disease, which is a terrible, terrible acid stomach, and he also has asthma. And we were in the garden centre about 2 years ago now, and this is after I'd started working with the plants, and he kept going up to this plant and stroking the flowers, and they were purple flowers, and he said, oh, this is a lovely flower, let's have some of that. So we got it home, And for the week after he got it, he spent the whole week walking past it and stroking it, and oh, isn't it lovely? And when I thought, oh, hang on a minute, let's just check this. So when I looked it up, it was devil's bit scabious. And when I looked it up in cold pepper, it treats acid stomach and asthma. So it's the plants are calling all the time. If you've got something that you need help with, they are desperately trying to get our attention. But the way that we acknowledge plants, and from my science background, there is a bit of, we see the world in mechanistic terms. We see it as a big machine. It's a biological machine, but it's a machine. And it just isn't. Everything is alive. And part of writing the book for me was an opportunity to get people in the craft to see some of the research about animism and about the fact that we even sometimes when I talk to people about the horned god and the mother goddess, they are slightly outside nature. And monotheistic religions particularly, they are not in nature at all, and it stems from the research I did. It all stems from the ancient Greeks, but it's come down through Christianity via Judaism through to Islam. And there's this disconnect with the natural world. And when I started working with the mugwort, she for me is my gateway plant. Yeah, it's almost like cannabis is your gateway drug. She opened the doors to other plants working with me. And my mum died in 2016. And one of the plants that I worked with really, really closely there was the yew tree. And it took me months because it's so slow. It really is. It's almost elephantine in its But when I got in contact with it genuinely made me understand that there's literally no such thing as death. We just cycle in different guises almost. It's almost as if we start one thing and then drop that, and then we'll start almost like, in your life when you start new jobs and that sort of stuff. It's almost that mechanism. But it was the plants that showed me that. I don't think I could have got that any other way. But the mugwort particularly, she is amazing. She's a fantastic ally, and she wants to work with people. And you'll see now, because a lot of people are working with mugwort now, and you'll see her starting to come up. And as they do that, they'll go into more plants and more. And eventually we will start to see them as people. And that's the goal of it, is to see plants and animals and rocks, as you say, your friends, as people. Because what we do at the moment is we consider ourselves to be top of the heap, and we don't consider anything else, and it is it's something, if we want to survive, because I think one of the things that people don't understand when they look at it from a ecological point of view is that we're not going to destroy the earth. We haven't got that power. We've had 7 extinction level events prior to us. All the earth will do is go, we'll try again with the bees. Let's do it again. But we won't be here because we're going to kill ourselves. It's not about killing the earth, it's about killing ourselves. And I like it here, I want to stay. It's lovely. So we just got to shape up a little bit, I think. So
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing I picked up on in what you were just saying there was it reminded me of something that I was taught when I first came into witchcraft and magic and paganism and all this. One of my mentors, one of the lovely mentors that I grew up with, when I first came into magic as a teenager, was this very animistic lady. She was very much in tune with the world around her and with the land that we were on at that time. And she taught me all the essentials, the things like how to speak with the stones, and I still have like her words echoing in my head about how the stones, because growing up in Anglesey, obviously there were tons of ancient monuments, standing stones and burial chambers, so we'd often go there to work our magic. And she would say, the stones, they're not just stones, they are alive, they're very much living people just as we are, and they've been here for so much longer than we have. They know things that we could never know. They remember things that have happened, and they remember everything that has ever touched them. So when we touch the stones, we are touching a surface that even our ancestors have touched as well. So we honor the stones within our practice back then, when I used to work with her, we used to honor the stones as kind of guardians of memory, guardians of the ancestral places and such. And she was very much of the idea that, you know, in Christianity and such, when they pray for their gods, when they look to their gods, they look up, they raise their palms to the sky. And she would always do this action where she would say, you know, like, I don't see my gods up there above me. They're here below me. They are in the earth. They are in the trees. They are walking amongst me. And I remember that changed my life. And you refer to yourself in your book as an animist. You've referred to yourself as an animist here today. I just wanted to, I guess, quickly ask, because I think animism is becoming more of a popular term these days. I've noticed there's a lot more books being written on animistic forms of witchcraft, and there's a lot more people talking about animism and how animism filters into our worldview and needs to be our worldview too. It's not just something you are, it has to be something you do as well. So I'm just curious if you could give us a little bit of an insight into what animism means for you and how it informs your day-to-day life, not just your magical life, but your day-to-day, everyday life as well.
Well, for me, it's the acknowledgement that everything has value in and of itself, that your swarm of bees that just flown past my house, finding a new home, have their right to be alive. They have the same inherent rights as we do, okay? Now, for a human, that's very hard because I'm not a vegetarian, okay? So what that means to me is I have to acknowledge and accept that I eat meat. But I will only eat meat that I know has been kept humanely and killed humanely. I try not to buy food from Tesco's and that sort of stuff, because you've no idea where that meat's come from. You've no idea what that animal's gone through. And you've no idea how the animal is honoured in the way that it's killed. And I have a really, really good friend that has a farm up in Cwmbran. And her idea of the correct way to slaughter animals is that her pigs, she has to, by law, she has to take them to an abattoir. But her ideal would be because she talks to them every day and they're free range and they're in the orchard and they're wonderful pigs and we talk to them regularly. And if she wants to use them for food, her ideal would be to have a bucket of food in front of them, be talking to them, and then use a humane killer on them in the back of their head so that they would not know what was happening. Our food system is, and it is something I'm working on in the net for the next book. Our food system, A, is unsustainable, and B, is cruel. You know, we take an animal to a place where other animals are slaughtered. They can smell that on the air, and we expect them to be calm. You know, it's bonkers, and you're eating that fear. That's the bit that I worry about. So I tend to eat as little meat as I can, but when I do eat meat, I make sure that and it is expensive. You know, I'm lucky enough to be able to afford that, but I don't eat meat every day. Okay. The other thing that I do is I say even, and it brings up another thing. When I'm eating plant material, I will always honour the plant materials. One of the things that I love about some of the Christian traditions is that they pray over their food. And you don't have to pray, but you do have to give thanks. That thing has died to give you life. So it's really important that we acknowledge that we are a parasitic world. Everything eats something, okay? And in order to pay respects, it's important that you know where your food comes from, that you know what it's taken to make that food. Farmers these days are working their bums off for no money because the Tesco's and that take all the profit. So don't buy it off Tesco's, buy it off a farmer's market or something like that. And that is an important side of it. The animism side of things is, it's about respecting your neighbour because that's what they are. You know, not mowing a lawn if you don't need to. You know, why do we need to mow lawns? Why does the council go out and cut down all the lovely highway middles when they could leave them alone? You know, why do we feel that we are more important than those plants? And it's going to take a massive change of focus for humans because we've never been able to do that. You know, it's been what, 2000, not I would say probably about 800 years when this anthropomorphic came in with Newton and all of that sort of stuff. And back in the ancient Greek times, it was there for a little bit. But we have to change. And the only way in my mind that we're going to do that is if we start to listen to our Indigenous peoples, because they've got the right idea. You know, I'm not talking about stealing their customs. I'm talking about listening to them politically and listening to what they say. You know, one of the things that was most informative to me was I read a paper on the shamans, the ayahuasca shamans in South America, and when the anthropologist said to the guy, the medicine guy, who taught you about this plant? And he sort of looked and he said, the plant did. But of course, because we are white Western, we poo-pooed that. Oh, that's rubbish, primitive, you know? And that word primitive is going to be the destruction of us, because they are living in concert with the earth. And we can't at the moment. We just don't know how to do it. You know, even myself, I'm sitting here now on Zoom. We are going to have a change in attitude to how we use technology, to how we live our lives. And I don't know how we're going to do it. I've got to be honest with you. I do worry about it, because I would love to think that we could do it, but I don't know if I've got the confidence.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because it's about understanding that things need to change, isn't it? Very much so. The world just is not working, unfortunately. We have to say it bluntly. It's not working. Things are not working, and it hasn't been working for a very, very long time. And the truth of it is that the main reason why it's not working is because we see ourselves so central, so important, above everything else, rather than living in tune with everything. And a huge part of my work, and I know you've done it too in yours, is dispelling that myth that we are somehow separate to nature, that we are somehow separate from the land, that the land is some separate thing away from us, that no, we are part of it, and we are very much of the world that we live in right now. And if we don't take note of that and identify that everything around us has as much right to be here as we do, then things are not going to change.
I think the bit that made me laugh when I first found out about it, and because I'm a great student of other religions, I think in order to argue against something, you've got to know how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And nearly every single major religion has a tree in the center of it, you know, but that's just poo-poo. The tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Bible, nobody talks about that after the first chapter. Yes, that just gave us sentience, you know, Yggdrasil, you know, all of that sort of stuff. It's central to all of the beliefs. And the bit that makes me go sometimes is the fact that it's written in the Bible that we're made out of the clay. So why do we see ourselves as separate? And it's pure race ego, really, in a way. And it is, I'm sad to say, based around this business that we are at that top of the golden chain of Homer, and everything as well. There's angels and God above us, and then everything else is underneath us, you know. And the poor old minerals don't get a looking because they're right down the bottom.
Yeah. Moving on to something else, I noticed, and you did speak a little bit on it, that you mentioned mugwort. And mugwort is a plant that I think I love working with on a spiritual level as well. Like they're a very good ally, I think. And as you said, when I started taking note of mugwort, I noticed it everywhere. It grows everywhere in quite an abundance around, like, pretty much the entirety of the UK, really. It's everywhere.
Motorways. It loves motorways.
Yeah, it's something that it's strange. You don't notice it if you don't know it, but once you know it, oh, there it is, everywhere. My personal, like, introduction to working with the plants that were in my locale was, again, my mentor that I mentioned earlier. She and I were having a conversation one day, and I think I wrote this in my book. I said, you know, I was having a conversation with her because it was nearing the winter solstice. And I said to her, I was whining, I was complaining because I was a teenager. I was saying, oh God, I really want to do a ritual for the winter solstice. But I really want to have these herbs. I want to have these herbs and these ingredients, these tools to do this ritual properly. And nobody will take me to Holyhead, to the nearest town, to buy some of these herbs from the local shop. And she looked at me with a face of disgust, and she was like, "You live in one of the most rural areas where every plant that you can dream of is probably growing along the coastal path, in the fields, even in the middle of winter, we still have things growing that we can work with, that we can work in tandem with. Go out with a book on plant identification, go and figure out what's growing, and then talk to them, figure out from them which plants would be beneficial to work with in this instance, and learn from there. Stop focusing so much on buying these herbs dried from shops
Oh,
and
I like
such.
your mentor. I
Yeah.
really like your mentor.
Oh, she was glorious. And I took her advice and I went with a little, it would be much easier nowadays because we have things like plant identifying apps and stuff.
Yes,
So
yes,
back then it was with a book. I went with a book and I was looking at all these leaves and figuring out all these plants. And it does give you a greater sense of connection to the land as well. It helps you
yes.
connect deeper to what is around you if you figure out what's around you. And it's one of the first things I did when I moved to this town that I currently live in. I went to the local park, I went to the local woods, and I even walked along the paths in the city and looked at all the plants that grow through the cracks in the
Yes,
pavements and such, and just
yes.
had a look at, because once you get an idea of what plants grow in your locale, you kind of get a sense of the very spirit of that place as well. You get a sense of what kind of place this is, because plants also follow us. And I love that whole thing about plants that follow humans. There are plants that have come with us, whether they've gotten their seeds attached to our clothes, whether we've eaten them and shat out their seeds, anything like
Yeah,
that.
it's the
There
same
are
with fungi.
plants.
But
Yeah.
you're covered with fungi spores. If you pick up a fungi, you're going to spread it everywhere because there's millions of them. I love it. I love it.
Exactly. They've worked and lived side by side with us for thousands and thousands of years. And sometimes learning about the plants of the wayside, the plants of the locale, is the best way, even though it's very mundane. Because, a lot of people, when they ask, how do I connect to the spirit of place, they're expecting meditation and trance
Yes.
and magic. But really, it's go pick up a book, figure out what's growing around you. But
Yeah.
I loved the way in your book you talked about working with the spirit of mugwort and the ways in which that mugwort plays a role in your life. And I'm just wondering, do you have any advice for people who might be just starting out, who are maybe a bit overwhelmed with it, because it can be scary as well. There are some plants that are deadly and such, and coming to an understanding of not only how to identify them safely, but also how to work with them in a magical level. What advice would you have to someone who's just starting out?
Honestly, the first thing is, because I think I write about it in the book, is ignoring that little voice inside of you that says, you're just imagining this is not real. You're just imagining it. And it's one of the wonderful things about working in a coven is that we will work with plants, but separately. And then we'll all come back together and say, right, I got this, what did you get? And the similarities are amazing, okay? And you have that sort of group mind philosophy where you're filling in the gaps that other people haven't had. But I think the most important thing is understanding that they are speaking to you, and they may pick different ways. It's really weird. I was just talking to one of my mates about working with fungi, because I've started doing the same sort of process about 2 or 3 years ago with fungi, and understanding that when you're getting, I don't get voices from plants, okay? I get images and I can translate those into words, yeah? So if you get an image of a plant, excuse me, I'm going to cough again. I've got one of those wonderful summer colds. If you get an image of a plant that is, for example, it's blood or capillaries, which is what Mugwort gave me. Mugwort is a bloodletter, right? She works very, very well on the female reproductive system. And people forget when they work with mugwort and they drink the mugwort tea and all that sort of stuff, it'll start your periods off something rotten, okay? So you've got to be really, really careful with the way that you actually work with her. But she's also the moon, because if you look at her leaf, she's got that dark green on the top and then that flash of silver when the wind catches her. So you can work with her on emotions, you can work with her on phases of your life, you can work with her on different aspects. She's a wonderful dream herb. If you take mugwort, she's a fantastic dream herb. And the way that I work with her is I use alchemy, because I'm a sad science nerd. I will distill alcohol and then I'll run her through what's called a sock slit apparatus with my little sigil on the front of it. And you get a tincture, but it's a really strong tincture. And then you put a little drop of it under your tongue, and then you go and sit with her and you have a little chat, or you can smoke her, you can drink her tea. She's really, really versatile. But when you get to something like wolfsbane or monkshood, you need to be more careful, because if you start taking tinctures of monkshood, you won't be here long. So what we do with her is we would make an essence. So you'd soak her leaves in, or the flowers, if you can get the flowers, you can soak the leaves in. But we use the live plant, okay? We don't. One of the things that I really believe is that herbs will work however you get them, okay? They will work if they're dried and they're 2 years old, and they'll work. But when you have a live herb that you're working with, it's far stronger. It's much more involving in the spirit of the plant, okay? There used to be what did they used to call them, the dryads, the dryads of the plant, spirits of the plant, we call it. But with mugwort, what we do is put like a bowl on the flower and let the water soak it. And then you dilute that down a hell of a lot before you even come anywhere close. Same with foxglove. Anything dangerous, you've got to be careful. And one of the most fantastic things I ever found on eBay was a 1821 pharmacopoeia, which is about this thick, and it's got all of the wonderful recipes that they used to use for herbal medicine, and most importantly, it's got the measurements, so you don't kill yourself if you're making opium tea. You've got to be really, really careful with these things, because some of them are deadly. But what I find with the herbs that are a little bit spicier is that sometimes you'll try and make contact with them, and you won't be able to, because they just don't want to work it with you in that way. And that's one of the most important things that we find incredibly difficult as humans, is that word no. And sometimes you'll hear it, and you'll hear it very clearly, and it'll hit you in the chest or it'll hit you in the stomach. And we will sometimes, but I want that wand. I really want that one. So why can't I have it? And we'll ignore when the plant is saying no, and you can't. You've got to listen, because that wand's not going to work for you. In fact, it probably work against you. So just listen to what they're saying. When you're working with the flowers, or you're working with the green people, just listen to what they're saying. Or they might even say, yes, I want to work with you, but not now, because this is going on, and you're not ready for that yet, on top of what you're doing. So it is important that you listen really, really carefully to them, and just feel where that yes or no is in you. If you get a yes, it's lovely. It's like, whoa, you can feel that acceptance. And when you get a no, it's a no. I don't know whether, did you read the little poem I wrote about the buttercup?
Oh, yes.
That was hysterical, because I thought, oh yeah, I'll work with the buttercup, because it's in Charabel's book, and I'll have a little go. And I was expecting this lovely yellow flowers, flower of the sun, lovely to work with, maybe do some planetary work with the. Oh, he was the most aggressive little shit you've ever experienced. He was wild, and he was so Martian. I've never experienced anything like it, and I've just stayed away from him, because I just think, no, he doesn't want to work with anyone. It's not just me, it's anyone. He really doesn't like people. So and it's funny, because I've got one growing in my garden, and I think he's doing it just to spite me.
Oh my goodness. No, it's a strange one, because I went through a whole process of learning to listen when I was younger. And one thing that really struck me was that sometimes if you don't listen to the plant or the tree that you want to work with, and you don't listen to that no, you override it and you say, oh, I don't care, I want to do it anyway. Sometimes things will happen, not just on an emotional level or on an energetic level, but in a physical level as well. There was this tree that was glorious oak tree that used to grow next to my friend's horse field. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this tree is in like this little hidden grove, and it's at the center of the little grove, and it's beautiful. And I think I want to make a wand out of its wood, because it's the most beautiful oak tree I've ever seen. So I went and I tried to forge a connection with this oak tree. And every time I would try and build a relationship with it, I got this intense, sickly feeling inside. But I didn't care. I was like, oh no, I'm a stroppy teenager and I'm going to do it anyway. And as time went on, I started building this relationship, because I was taught, luckily, I was taught, don't just go and snap a twig off a tree straight away to make a wand, build a relationship first. So I was going there and I was leaving offerings and I was speaking to the tree, and I used to read poems to them because I was a romantic little thing. And I would sit there for hours and I'd always have this like almost sickly feeling like the tree didn't want me to be there. But I just ignored it because I was so desperate to want this tree to like me. It's almost like when you want to make friends with someone
Yeah,
that you really, really like and admire, but they just don't want anything to do with you, really. And, you have to respect that boundary, regardless of whether it's a green person or a human person. It's still a boundary that they're setting in place. But I pushed through anyway. And I remember close to the time when I was going to cut the branch to make a wand, things started going wrong physically around the tree. So the first time I went with the intention of cutting something, I accidentally chopped off a piece of my thumb with the scissor things. I can't remember what they're called now. The
effective.
garden, yes. And I chopped off a little bit of my thumb and had a scar there for ages. It's gone now, strangely. But I remember that one was really bad and I was bleeding profusely and I had to run home to get it all bandaged up and such. Probably should have had stitches, but didn't. But then the second time I tried, I lost a bracelet that was really dear to me as I was walking into the trees. And I got really distracted by that. And I was like, oh no, where's this bracelet gone? And by the time I found the bracelet, it was getting dark and I was cold. So I went home. And then I think the third time when I went there and I got really sick to my stomach to the point where I felt like I was going to throw up, I thought to myself, maybe these are signs.
Yes,
Took me long enough,
but it
but
does. Because we're not used to that. No, we've not.
no.
And like the thing I always say to my guys is these these beasties have been around for millions of years longer than us.
Mhm.
We know how to work magic. Do you not think they do?
Exactly. It's it's one thing I remember when I was starting to branch out of my usual books that I read, and I started reading more on traditional witchcraft when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And I started reading books by I think it was Nigel Pearson, and
Yes,
he wrote a book called Treading the Mill.
I don't
And
know.
in that book, he has a whole section where he talks about trees, and he said in it, don't bloody go up and hug them, don't be one of those people, like respect the tree's boundaries, don't go up and just randomly hug a tree. And I remember getting really angry reading that and thinking, no, I'm a tree hugger, I love hugging trees, I'm going to do it anyway. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, would I like it if random people just walked up to me and hugged me in the street
Exactly.
without asking my permission? And so it really changed my perspective and made me
Yeah,
go, I need to start looking at these entities as people, as just as,
that's it.
yeah, just as complicated as we are. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it is one thing
I
to
think
learn.
one of my weirdest experience, I talked about it in the Welsh Occult Conference a couple of weeks ago, is I was looking, I wanted to do some work against the ash dieback disease, the fungus, and I wanted to use a blackthorn wand, okay? And blackthorn round by us, because we have hedgerows, they're like horizontal forests, all right?
Mhm.
So the trees grow lengthwise rather than up. And I went to the one bit and I've been walking around I mean, I walk around it every day. I standing by this blackthorn and I said, could I possibly take a bit of you for my work to stop them? No, just no, right? So I walked a good half a mile away from it and I got to this, what I thought was another one. And I went, could I possibly take a little bit of you to work with? Yeah. And he just went, still me? No. It's like, oh, okay. It's really funny. But it is. It takes a while to realize that they are people,
Mhm.
And like I say, that that tree didn't say those words to me, but the feelings I had, you could interpret that in that way. It's quite weird though, because working with fungi, completely different experience than I expected. Number one, my nails have never forgiven me because they're constantly stinking dirty. Because the way that I work, you may not work with fungi like this. I work with fungi is I don't wait for the fruiting body. I know that I have honey fungus in the back garden with me, so I sit with my fingers in the earth. Okay. And what I get is this strange thing. I thought they'd be slow, and they're not. They're so fast, but they come it's almost like you're hearing it. They go, it's like that sort of noise. It's like static electricity almost.
Mm.
And I'm trying to find a way now to get that translated into what they want to say. And that's incredibly hard because it's nothing like the plants. It's really strange. So that's my current project that I'm working on. So
Oh gosh, yes. And that whole topic of seeing plants and trees and just nature in general with personhood, with spirit, with an identity of their own, it kind of segues me over into the next question I have for you. And that is surrounding the fact that, well, you're a scientist as well. You have an MSc in applied biology.
I,
And you're quite scientific minded. And I'm sure like your scientific mind also influenced your craft as well as you grew into it. But one thing I picked up on in your book is that you are very able to, and this is something I admire you for because I know quite a few scientifically minded pagans, and a lot of them, they find it difficult to critique science in any way. They find it very difficult to kind of see that sometimes there are problems in science, in the scientific
oh
world as
yeah,
well. And you're not like that. You're very quick to say, no, there is a problem in how we're doing this. And one of those big problems being that we don't see the natural world as alive in a scientific mindset nowadays. We do see it as some machine, this, and every tree, every creature is a cog in this great, almost machine-like thing that lacks any personhood. And when we start looking at the world like that, it can cause issues and lead us to where we are now with all these issues that we have. And I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of information on that, and just in general, like, how can we shift away from seeing the world in this machine-like way, and how does your scientific mind reconcile those two things, your animistic kind of nature with your scientific nature as well?
it's difficult. And when I first started down this road, I did have those. I call them my doubt demons, where you think, well, that can't be real because it's not inside the scientific purview, right? So, and you try and impose a scientific method on something that you just can't because it's experiential, okay? And one of the things that science wants is repeatable results. And my experience with mugwort as a menopausal lady of 58 will not be the same as a 14-year-old who's just going into the menstrual cycle, because it'll come at you at different angles. One of the things that I try to be really clear to with people is that we all wear masks, and your plant work will work with the mask that you are currently experiencing. So if you are depressed, you may work with mugwort to lift that depression. Psilocybin mushrooms have just been given fantastic scientific work about clearing depression, and it clears it instantly. Okay, we knew that by just taking mushrooms. It makes you feel at one with everything. Okay, so it is really important that people realize that science has suddenly become the new church. All right. In the old days when Galileo was running about like a boy, the church was right. There was no wrong. And what we find now is that science is right. And you can't be outside that narrow boundary that science says is real science. Um, uh, Rupert Sheldrake is one of my favorite authors, and he sort of picks that apart. And he talks about the fact, because we have these things called constants in science, which when you actually break them down, they're not constant. The speed of light is not constant. Gravity is not constant. It depends on where you are in the world. If you're up high, it's less. If you're down low, it's more. So, but people think that because science said it, it's true. Yeah. And one of the most difficult things to get people away from, and I've got quite a few scientists in my coven. I've got one guy that is what's called oh gosh, he's the man with no portfolio in our coven. We never know what job he's doing, but he's a scientist that just sits and brainstorms different ideas, and then they'll come out with different things. Okay, he's working with the Saudi government at the moment, or the Dubai government, about that big strip thing.
Mm.
And I'm saying, don't get involved with that. That's a bloody disaster ecologically. Good God. But then I've got another scientist who works in gene therapy. So we all have a way of looking at things in a scientific way, but sometimes you have to realise that science only knows what it knows. It doesn't know what it doesn't know. And your experience is a valid experience, even if someone else can't repeat it. It's really important that people understand that, particularly when they're working with, I mean, you see it in the way that people working with spirit are just poo-pooed, that can't be real. But I know that after my mother died, I was convinced that my grandfather had come to pick her up in the hospital because I could feel him there. And I was sitting in the room after doing a little bit of a memorial, and one of the nurses said, "Oh, good grief," she said, "I just saw a little white pony for some reason, and that's my grandfather's pony." Do you know what I mean? So I know that there are times when my experience will supersede that science knowledge. And one of the things that scientists can't do, no matter how hard they try, is I can dissect a bird, but I'll never know what makes it fly, and I'll never know what makes it a bird, and I'll never know what it is to be a bird. So it really is, we need to make sure that we're not looking at things from our perspective and thinking that that perspective is right. I tell you, one of the things that people need to do is go on Google and look up flowers in ultraviolet or infrared, because we think we see the world as it is. But if you look at the flowers in infrared, you can actually see the landing pad that the bee has on all the flowers. It's got a landing pad. It knows where to fly because it sees in infrared. So we don't see it all. We don't hear it all. We see a very narrow spectrum and we hear a very narrow spectrum. You're only going to look at the dogs that can detect epilepsy. What are they sensing that we're not seeing? So science is lovely. It's wonderful. It's very clever. We are clever little monkeys. We really are. But it's not everything. It's not everything. And it's one of the reasons that I worry about, and I know we speak about this in the Welsh conference, about the fact that we are the first census in 2021 where Christianity was under 50%. But the next biggest group was atheists. Mm-hmm. And I do worry about that, because an atheist will see the beauty of life. They will see but they won't see that sacredness of life. I don't think, maybe I'm judging it from a wrong perspective and I need to talk to more atheists. That's the truth of it. But science is fantastic. There are times when I look at it though, and I read about things and I do think, when is enough? When do we go to a point where we think, do you know what? Actually, knowing that and having that information is not worth the sacrifice we make for it,
Definitely. And I was very fortunate to have caught your talk at Welsh Pool on ecological witchcraft, and it was brilliant. I will say that much. But one thing that really stood out to me in your talk, something that I think is very pertinent right now. It's very pertinent for people who are just coming into witchcraft and magic, because we oh gosh, I might offend people by saying this, but when we become witches, when we become pagans, when we move into a more spiritual way of thinking, we do tend to have this sense of ego that we know better, we know more than people, we're more enlightened, and we don't often stop to think about the things that we do within our communities that is also harmful. And you were brilliantly able to point out a lot of these things, topics such as cultural appropriation. Not only is appropriating, say, white sage harmful on a cultural level, which should be enough to make people stop doing it, appropriating a culture that's already been exploited and subjected to all sorts of evils, that should be enough to stop people from wanting to go to the local new agey shop and buy their bundle of white sage for £1. But also, when we look at it on an ecological level, it causes so much damage as well. And one conversation, I used to run a spiritual development class here in the city that I'm in now, and we used to struggle a lot, me and the other people who used to organise these spiritual development classes, with talking about crystals specifically, and the impact that crystal mining has on the world, and how we never think of these things. I've met full-on like activist style vegans who are very outwardly open about how one of their big reasons for not eating meat is because of the ecological impact of meat on the world, but then they wear like these clear quartz points and these citrine bracelets and opal earrings, and they do it in order to connect to the earth and all this, and they don't stop to think about, well, what about the ecological impact of that, you know? And not only that, but I remember once I asked one of my vegan friends, do you consider crystals vegan? Because, you know, a lot of them, they destroy natural landscapes that are homes for animals. And a lot of animals have had their, like, ecosystems destroyed in order for mining to take place and such, for things like that. So are they really considered vegan? You know, if we're not going to consider things like figs or honey vegan because of the animals that have been used for those, then can we really consider crystals which are mined from the earth? And you pointed that out very much in your talk, and you said about how, you know, we need to move away from connecting, especially for those of us here in the UK and such. Like, you know, I often sit and think back to, gosh, I've brought her up a lot today, but my mentor, she used to say to me, you know, like, how are you going to connect to Mother Earth in Wales, in on a little stretch of coastline in Wales, if you're trying to do it by holding a piece of amethyst that was dragged out of the earth in a mine somewhere in Madagascar, or an opal that was mined out in Australia somewhere, when instead you could just go sit on the cliff and connect to Mother Earth via the rocks that are there beneath your feet, beneath your ass if you sat on the ground. And I think we do need a bit of a shift towards that, and, you know, focusing on connecting to the rocks that are here in our locale, rather than flying massive amounts of rocks that have been blown out of the earth.
It was really interesting in the talk because one of the ladies talked to me, and I think she asked the question in the middle of the talk where I was saying about you'd be better off going and picking pebbles off the beach. And she said to me, but you can't, they won't allow you to take pebbles off the beach. And I'm saying, that in itself says to me, you're not going to take pebbles. You're thinking about the work that you're going to do, and maybe going down the beach to look for one red pebble.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that we do as humans, we it's not enough to be a witch. You need to be seen to be a witch, okay? And the way that that has transpired over the last 30 years is the wearing of crystals, the wearing of religious symbols like the pentagram and that sort of stuff. I'm covered in tattoos, so, you know, I've got nothing to say. I've got my religiosity is on my body. Luckily, at my age, not many people see that. But the crystal side of things, I've got no objection to using a crystal. What I've got an objection to is buying something you don't use, and wearing it as jewelry doesn't count, because that's just wearing it. And people need to understand, you know, there's this great kickback at the moment against coal. Well, what's the difference between a coal mine and an opal mine? They're both strip mines. They both employ slave labor almost, because the payment is very, very low. And it's shipped massive distances over the ocean to be sold. Because most people in the place where it's mined won't buy an opal. It's done for the Western market. Frankincense, that's my absolute worry. I have frankincense in the house, but we're killing the trees. And it's not, in the old days, when the Catholic Church was the only place that you ever smelt frankincense incense, it wasn't so bad because there was like one cathedral in a town that would burn it. Now every single New Age person or pagan or witch or whatever you want to call yourself is burning incense. And if you multiply that by the number of people who are following that path, those trees are going to die. So we need to look at what we have in our, like I said in the talk, pine resin. Go for a walk up your local wood and pick pine resin. You get lovely and sticky, and it smells divine, and it's normally filthy. So you can sort of really work with it and work with the tree there as well. But with crystals, I do worry about it incredibly, because, and I've got crystals, and I remember about 10 years ago I started thinking this way, and I thought to myself, right, this is what I'll do. I'll put them back in the ground. But you can't, because they don't come from here. So even if you put them back in the ground, it's not going to work. They just won't fit in. So mine are displayed on a pretty plate inside my temple, but I will never buy another one. because I just think if we are going to work in an ecological thing, and we're really good as pagans, right? We're really good at not trying our best not to get involved in sort of the capitalistic ideal. You know, you haven't got a Starbucks of paganism, you know, where you go and you buy your ritual wine or whatever it is. And the little shops that I know of they're people that are hand to mouth. You know, they don't overcharge. But then you get places like beautiful places that I love, Glastonbury, where I walked into Glastonbury crystal shop about 5 years ago, and there was a sphere about this big, £10,000. Why? Why would you buy that? Why would you buy it? You're not going to use it. And one of the things that people don't understand is that magicians used crystals. Okay, so if you wanted to work with Venus, you worked with an emerald, what do they call cabochon, and you would carve little talismans on it. Okay, but they were like that big. Do you know what I mean? And they were very rare and they were very expensive. And it's one of the old alchemist saying, isn't it? You need gold to produce gold. They had to be bought, but they only ever used them once, and they kept them as a purposeful crystal. We just sort of put them on our shelves and show people that we got crystals because it makes us feel witchy, you know. And I do, and it's not the most popular thing to say. And Sarah Mastros came up to me after and she said, oh, "You'd get killed if we went to America and said that." But somebody's got to say it, because if we are the green future of philosophy, or because I hate the word religion, but our philosophy is a good way forward. You know, we're very accepting, we're very focused on the equality of all people, green, whatever sex you are, whatever gender you are, whatever, we're very accepting. Then we need to look at the trueness of what we do right in the eye. Otherwise, we're just playing, you know. And this one, I think we've got to stand up and say, it needs to stop.
Definitely. I've had a lot of people, because I think the first time that I heard about the associations with crystals and the difficulties surrounding them was when I was around 18 or 19 years old. And I remember, when you first get into paganism and witchcraft, I thought it was just the thing that people did. It was just something you do, if you're a witch, you like crystals, and that's what you do. And you go down to the local New Age hippie shop and you buy your tumbled stones. And I never really had an interest in them, and I always felt bad about that. I always felt like there was something wrong with me because of that, where I couldn't connect to crystals, so there must be something wrong with me and my spirituality. And I even remember I was at a moot, around 18, 19, like I said, years old, and I said, I don't connect to crystals in the way that people talk about it. And I often, when I go into shops, crystal shops and such, and I pick up a crystal, I don't feel this healing, wonderful vibration energy that people say they do. I feel sadness. And when I've said that in the past to crystal shop owners, when I've said, how do you pick a crystal? Because I always get told that it's intuitive and that you pick up, but almost every crystal I pick up makes me feel, for lack of a better word, heavy. It just makes me feel heavy and full of like some kind of almost guilt-like feeling. And every time I said that in a crystal shop, they would always go, well, that's you being negative. That's you holding negative energy.
No, that's
Or
you saying what needs to be said, because and
yeah.
that one of the things that I think paganism needs to do in general is be honest with itself about what we are doing. We are wonderful. We are fantastic. You know, the idea that I can follow a spiritual path that is just for me, that it doesn't have to fall into line with anybody. And I'm a great poo-pooer of people that say, no, you're doing it wrong. Right? If you're in a tradition, if you've decided to join a coven, then you follow the way that the coven does it when you're in the group. If you're doing something else outside, that is your development, that is your business. And I really dislike the idea that we follow this dogma. And I don't want that to come into paganism, because it's fantastic. But we do need to look at things that are true and things that are wrong. You know, it's many, many, many years ago when I first started into paganism, there was a big hoo-ha about a person that was offering initiation for sex. Okay, Now, if your coven advertises itself that you need to have sex to get in the coven, then that's up to you. But it should never be that somebody gives sex for an initiation, because that's not it. You need to, an initiation is something that you undergo. You don't undergo it after being forced to have sex. Do you know what I mean? And those things we need to look in the eye and say, that's not what we want. We need to move somewhere else. Yeah, and that does worry me. You know, but the crystal side of things, I just think if people actually looked at what they do with their crystals, they'd understand that. And like I say, you got to keep your crystals. You can't send them home. It just doesn't happen. Stop buying them. Don't buy any more.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
down your beach, pick a pebble, get a hagstone. I love hagstones. I think they're awesome. You know, and even when you're using your stones, if you've finished using it, take it back to the beach. Stick it on the beach again. You know, you can take them home if you've got them from Wales. So, but it is, I just think that sometimes we live in a land where we're doing nothing wrong and other religions are, but we don't look at it right in the face, and we should.
Definitely. There's so many like little caveats and like I don't know, little notes that we have to put on this, because it's not a case of you're wrong if you like crystals, or
No,
or you're evil if you support these crystal mines or buy white sage or anything like that. We've all done it. We've all gotten into that habit. I think
sure.
when we first come
Like
into
I
it.
said, I've got a plate of them out in my temple.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
the main thing is just, if you are using them, rock on. You know, use them. But if you're not using them, don't buy any more. And with the things like the white sage and the frankincense, if we don't stop using them in the way we are, we won't ever be able to use them, because they'll be gone.
Exactly. And I'll hold my hands up and say, I have crystals. I have a few, like most of them, unfortunately, I have a lot of friends who don't know much about witchcraft. And so they Google what do witches like, and they buy me crystals as gifts around
Yeah.
my birthday. And I've tried telling them, buy me a cauldron instead. I'm obsessed with cauldrons. Go to the charity shop, find a pot. I like those instead. But I do have some crystals, and I do also wear, it's something that it's kind of part of my brand now, if I have one, is I have a necklace that has a clear quartz point on it, but that one was antique. It was something that is very old and I've had for very many years, so it's not something I'm really going to give up now just because I've changed my mind on crystals. But
I don't think that's the way forward. I think the way
no.
forward is just to look at it and think, right, I've got these things, they're beautiful. I'm going to use them more. I'm going to acknowledge where they come from, and then stop. Just don't buy any more. You know, because we can't go backwards. We're not Doctor Who, much as I would love to be. You know,
Absolutely. And I know some people will say, well, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, but we can still do better. We can still try and do better, even though it's true. Oh gosh, that was a bit sorry to tangent there with you. Oh gosh. So another thing that I wanted to talk about, that I was really excited to talk about because it's something that I got really excited about when reading your book, was the fact that your book explores also working astrologically and alchemically with plants, and how alchemy and astrology fits into your practice as well. But one section that I really enjoyed was when you mentioned a Welsh occultist and astrologist named, I think is it Charabel? Is that how you pronounce
Charabel, yes.
Charabel? I always get stuck on whether it's Charabel or
Yes.
Carabel or.
The unfortunate thing for the lovely Charabel is that his real Welsh name was John Thomas.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, exactly. Which, for those of you that don't know, can sometimes be the Welsh name for Willie. So I think that's why he changed his name. But he is an amazing man. He did all sorts of different things before he actually got into what I would term to be almost like a form of Welsh shamanism, because he literally did what we do. He went and sat with his plants. And what you do is you go and you sit with your plant and you diet the plant, right, as long as it's safe. And then you receive a name or a sigil from the plant. And then when the plant is dormant, you can still work with the plant through the winter, which I think is a brilliant idea. Now, if you ever see a picture of, I think I've got a picture of it I've got a copy of my book here. Where are you, young man? He is the most magnificently bearded man And he was a member of an organisation that was an astrological organisation. One of his colleagues was a man called Alan Leo. And Alan Leo was why is it you can never find it when you want it? Was the one of the leading founders of psychological astrology. Okay, so he was using Jungian stuff before Jung actually started using it. But he just look him up. His book is called Grimoire Sympathica, and it's actually got plants, lichens, moss, and minerals in it. Okay, which is really interesting because that's something I'm really interested in using his methods to work with things like soil. We overlook soil. You know, it's literally what gives us life, and yet we call it dirt and we ignore it. And it's a fantastic thing, and that's where the fungal work comes in as well. But he looked at astrology as a psychological way of looking at the world. So, for example, if you had Leo in your first house, you would be very egotistical, and it wasn't like there's different types of astrology. Platonic astrology is called the astrology of the soul, and what it is when you're born, you make a decision before you incarnate as to what life you're going to live and what lessons you're going to learn, and then you're born with a celestial arrangement that gives you that life. Okay. But Alan Leo and Charabel had this idea that when you were born, particular planets will reflect into your personality, and you, sort of in simpatico with them, show those tendencies. So it's very much based on psychological work. I'm not that keen on that one. I'm a bit of a Platonic astrologer myself. But I get where they come out, and there's some fantastic books on psychological astrology. But his work, he did a lot on Calvinism as well. It was the what's the word for it? When they used to electrocute people, he did a lot on that as well. So he was heavily into sort of the alternate theme. But some of the things that he wrote in Grimoire Sympathica, it's amazing. You know, it's really, really good. And I tried to keep the format of his work, because what he tended to do was he would work, and then he'd have a sigil, and then he'd write a poem about what he experienced. So I tried to keep that going with my very bad poetry, but it's it is poetry. But his stuff was just amazing. And the alchemy came into it because he wasn't an alchemist. That came into it because I'm a great friend of a chap who's written some wonderful books called Gary St. Nottingham, who taught me alchemy and taught me how to use and make tinctures. And I use that as a reinforcement of the relationship, particularly in the winter, where you can use the tincture and then use the sigil to work with the plant spirit, even though they're a bit sleepy. So that's where that came from. But Grimoire Sympathica is a very difficult book to get hold of. So if you do get a copy, it's well worth having a look.
Oh, yes, I agree, because when I read your book, I'd never really heard of Charabel before I read your book. And when I read it, I thought, oh gosh, I love learning about new kind of Welsh occultists and magical people that I didn't know about before. Any of the kind of Welsh lunatics that went out and did strange things, I love, absolutely love. And so I went and I tried to find any books on Charabel that I could. And there's a couple that come up sometimes on eBay, but some of them are, they're really expensive.
I was incredibly lucky that I found one probably about, it must be about 25 years ago, and I didn't know what I had, because it was really funny, because when we started talking about this Charabel method, I said, what's it called? And Gary said, Grimoire Sympathica. I said, bloody hell, I got that. So, of course, I read it, and we went from there, because it's a very, how can I put this? The English, because it's quite an old book, the English that he uses is very, very formal and very, very difficult to read on occasions, but it's brilliant. And the print is and it's a reprint. Grimoire Sympathica is a reprint of his book. His original book was called The Ethnobotany of Crystals, Minerals and Plants. And that's the actual original one, which is even harder to read because there's no rhyme nor reason in the book. It's just all sort of put together in a really weird way. So
Oh gosh, and speaking of Welsh occultists and magical people, I don't think we could sit down and talk to you without bringing up the Welsh Occult Conference, of course. I mentioned it at the beginning that you run the conference and you also speak at the conference. You gave an amazing talk this past month. It was this month, wasn't it? Oh my gosh,
yes,
where's
yeah,
this month gone?
I know.
In Welsh Pool on the ecological aspects of witchcraft and paganism and such. And I just wanted to, I suppose, ask how did the Welsh Occult Conference come to be? Was it something that you started, or did you take it over? What was the history there?
Well, when I was a baby witch, probably when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, there was a wonderful conference in Ludlow. Okay, and that was organised by Gary St. Nottingham. And it was amazing because it wasn't a camp, because at that time the only place you got to talk about paganism was in camps, moots. Yeah, we had the Neath moot at the time that I was going to, and then you had this conference. But this conference was different because it was quite academic. There was a lot of people that had written really good books. Daniel Schulk was there 1 year. David Rankin used to go, Gary used to go. There used to be lots of people that had written really good books, and you got a chance to sit and listen to them. But what happened was in about 2019, 2018, Gary decided he wanted to open it again, but this time in Welsh Pool, because he stopped for a while. Gary was the original organiser of the Green Man festival in Clun.
Oh.
Okay. And he was doing that for a couple of years, and then he went back then to do this festival in Welsh Pool. So he did one, and then his wife became quite ill. So he asked me if I'd take it over. I said yes. And then in 2019, we did the first one. And then, of course, 2020, we had COVID. So the second one we did was in 2022. And so many people asked me why wasn't I doing one in Cardiff, that I very quickly organised one in Cardiff, with which you were one of the speakers. And it seemed to be really successful. So I thought, well, one of the things I loved about the Ludlow conference was it was somewhere you could go and talk to serious magicians or serious pagans, or people that were really interested in the detail of it, of mythology and that sort of stuff. And we didn't have anything like that in Wales at the time. And I just thought, you know what, for somebody coming up, it's an ideal way to be introduced to the aspects of it that sometimes you don't get to hear in moots, and you don't get to hear in camps, because camps are awesome, right? I love camps, but they are very much a vehicle towards, or they used to be a vehicle towards celebration.
Mhm.
Now you have much more workshops and that sort of stuff coming in, which is awesome. But so that's roughly where we left it. Now, Gary, I'm hoping at some point Gary will come and speak again for us. But unfortunately, his wife is still very ill, so I'm going to
Oh,
wait to see if that one comes.
I hope so too, because I'd love to hear a talk by Gary St. Nottingham, because
It's amazing.
I've read his book, obviously, one of them, the Welsh Border Witchcraft
Yes,
one.
yes, that's a good.
But no, it's something that I wanted to ask you about, because I really want to say here on the podcast that if at all you are able to come to either Welshpool or Cardiff, I very much recommend it, because the speakers are always amazing. And that's not me patting myself on the back, I mean the others. The other speakers are always amazing, and it's just a great vibe, for lack of a better word, to be in. It's a very good place to be in, and I've had wonderful conversations with not just the speakers, but the people who attend as well, the people who come to listen. It's a great place, so do come down and join us if you ever can. And I suppose I wanted to thank you, Shan, for organising such a wonderful thing, because coming into witchcraft and paganism and magic and such, I used to love going to conferences and festivals and events, and I still do. Nowadays, I go as a speaker, so it's a bit more stressful. But in the past, I used to travel, to places across the border, to Preston, to Stoke-on-Trent, and to London, even all the way to London, to be able to be part of these conferences. And I think you started something or Gary started something, and you took it over and made it into something amazing, that now it means there are more people running conferences conferences in Wales and such,
Yeah.
and it's brilliant that we have that atmosphere, that environment now where we can have people come and feel seen, I suppose. I suppose that's why I go to these things, because I like feeling seen and like I'm among my people.
But I really do think as well that Wales has such a wonderful, vibrant occult scene at the moment with you and with Chris Hughes, and there's loads of people that are practicing, and we're suddenly being seen by the world as a place that actually is doing the work, which is fantastic.
Mhm. Absolutely. Now, before we go, I just wanted to ask you, where can we find your book and how can we support you if people want to come find you elsewhere?
My book is published, that's going to be upside down, isn't it? Yes. By Black Lodge Publishing. So you can get that. You can go either via the Facebook link, or I'll put a link up on my Facebook. I am very old, so I don't tend to use TikTok, or I've got to start learning how to use Instagram because I'm terrible at it. But I am on Facebook, sadly. But it is I am quite difficult to find because I tend not to a lot. So but if you'd like to add me on Facebook or Instagram, I promise I'll try and be a little bit more active on Instagram, because at the moment I just lurk and watch what other people do. So, but I am learning slowly. It's it. Old dog, new tricks.
Oh, brilliant. So, Unveiling the Green, we will do a little explanation of the book and where you can buy it at the end of the podcast. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on today. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. And thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge with us on the Welsh Witch Podcast.
Thank you, Mhara. I really appreciate it.
Oh, bye.
Bye, lovely.
What a fabulous conversation that was. Thank you so much to Shan for joining me on the Welsh Witch Podcast. And you should absolutely go check out Shan's books over at the Black Lodge Publishing website or elsewhere. All the details will be down in the show notes, or if you're watching this on YouTube, down in the description below. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on the Welsh Witch Podcast. And I have to mention before we leave that this podcast would not be possible without those who support me on Patreon. Now, if you join us on Patreon, you get access to exclusive material that nobody else can see. That's exclusive videos, articles, sound files, podcast episodes, and you get early access to all the podcast episodes as well. So you can hear these episodes long before anyone else does. And on top of that, unedited and in video format. Ooh, yes, all the perks for my patrons. The information on how to join the Patreon will again be down in the description, or you can simply go to patreon.com/Mhara Starling. That's MHARA STARLING. Patreon.com/Mhara Starling. And on top of all of that, those who are part of the highest tier of my Patreon also get access to exclusive courses that deal with the magic, the lore, and the spirits of Wales. So do go check those out. That is how I keep these podcasts running. Thank you so much for listening. Diolch o galon am ymuno gyda fi unwaith eto yn fama. I hope I see you next time here at the Welsh Witch Podcast. But for now, hwyl fawr, ta-ra!